Do you use your histogram on your camera? In fact, do you even know where it is? Well, in this video, I'm going to have a quick review, simple review of the histogram, and hopefully share my knowledge of how to use and when to use the histogram. And that's whether you're a seasoned photographer or just a hobby photographer like I am. Hopefully you can get something out of this video. The histogram is effectively a graph that represents the tonal range of your image. What that means, it tells you where the dark parts of your image are and the light parts of your image are. And the idea is to give you a graphical representation to enable you to not underexpose your image, and that is clip the black parts of your image, have too many blacks in, or overexpose your image and have clip the white parts, of too many white parts. Because when you clip either the blacks or the whites, you can't recover detail. And what you want in your image is as much detail as possible. So your histogram will tell you when you've blown out the highlights, when you've blown out the bright colours, so that if you do that, you won't be able to get any detail back in them at all. Or equally, on the same vein, when you've underexposed, when you've clipped the dark parts, when you've made them too dark to see anything. And ideally, in your image, you don't want that. You want something nice in the middle, a nice tonal range. You don't have to have all the same flat tone, because obviously you want contrast, you want dynamic range in your image. But the last thing you really want in your photos is a super dark bit and a super light bit. You want something in the middle. And the histogram gives you that detail. It tells you sort of where your image is in the tonal range. The histogram is effectively broken up into 4 different parts. It has the blacks on the left as you look at it, then it has the shadows, then it has the highlights, and then it has the whites. And it sets in 4 different tonal ranges. And ideally, you want, when you're exposing your image, to be somewhere in the middle within the shadows and the highlights range. And you can use your histogram to give you that extra bit of information. Yeah, you can look through your viewfinder and set the right exposure. Your camera tells you effectively what the best exposure is. But that doesn't always mean that it's going to tell you whether you're clipping your blacks or your whites. So in one way, you could use your histogram to try to limit the amount of highlights or shadows that you're actually going to clip, and that's the ideal use for it. A couple of things to be aware of when you think about your histogram is that it doesn't have to be a perfect bell shape right in the middle of the histogram. That's not what you're after. The most important thing is that it's not right at the very top on the left and clipping out your blacks, and it's not right at the very top on the right and blowing out your highlights. What you want is somewhere in the middle. It could be that you have 2 spikes. You have a spike of shadows and a spike of highlights, and that's fine. It could go up and down like this, or it could be all to one side, or at the dark side, it could be that you're taking a picture, a dark photo with lots of darks in it, or it could be you're taking a picture on a bright sunny day with lots of highlights in it. So your histogram would be to the right. It doesn't matter whether it's all to the left or all to the right, as long as you're not clipping your highlights and blowing out your blacks, because once you do those, you can't recover them. It's really important to be aware of. And also, obviously, if you're like me and you're shooting raw, it's important to be aware that the histogram on the back of your camera when you're taking your shot is more likely going to be the histogram for a JPEG file and not the raw file. When you get your image back into your editing software, you might find what it did show you slightly clipping either side might not be clipping. But whether that's accurate or not, my advice would be to try not to clip right or left and hand side of your image, because there's a good chance you won't be able to recover that detail. You want it somewhere in the middle. As long as it's sort of not the right or left, then you're in a good place. On many cameras, especially the DSLRs, and in fact I've got a Canon 400D here, it doesn't show you the live histogram. So what you have to do is take your shot, look at your photograph and look at the histogram after you've taken it. And I think that's common with DSLRs because of the live view factor. Maybe the more modern ones, and I don't have a modern one to check, that you do have a live view histogram. But on the Canon and the Nikon 5000D that I've got here as well, on these two, that you don't get a histogram on the live view. You can only look at the histogram after you've taken the shot, which is still helpful because that enables you to take your shot, check your histogram, and then you can take your shot again if you need to. Whereas on a more modern digital camera, a more modern digital mirrorless camera, for instance, this EPL5 Olympus, you get live histograms. So you can, before you even take your photograph, you can check to see if you're blowing out any highlights or if you're got any too dark shadows. You can tell straight away, and you can adjust your settings or change your view to reduce any of those highlights or dark patches. Now, if you can't adjust your field of view, if you can't adjust the angle of your image, obviously what you can do to reduce those highlights and bring out your blacks is to take more than one photo. And what you would do is you'd take a photo which is exposed for the normal range that your camera gives you. And if that shows you blown out highlights, then you can also take a picture that is reduced in exposure, and you can blend those together in your editing software, and then you can get a much more even exposure. The histogram isn't just a black and white tonal range graph. You can also get an RGB histogram, red, green, blue, and that shows you the range of colours in your image. And in truth, I've never ever found that useful. It's never been helpful. It hasn't really given me any extra information. But you might find it interesting. It might be something for you to look at. When I take a photo, especially using my Olympus digital mirrorless cameras, I always look at the histogram just to make sure that I'm not overdoing the blacks or overdoing the highlights, just to make sure I'm in the right range. And I try my best as much as I can to hit those numbers. This is a really short video about the histogram. I hope you use it, and I hope you found this video useful. If you have, why not give it a like? And if you obviously like this kind of content, it would be great if you would subscribe to the channel. I'd be super pleased if you did. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheerio.